for agenda item number 9, which is the mayor's 10-year retrospective. And so I have a slideshow with some photos of people, projects, and accomplishments and aspirations. So pardon me just a minute while I get over there by the big machine. Okay, so some of you may remember back in 2003 when I was a rookie candidate with John Dickinson running for Moscow City Council, kind of a reluctant candidate at that. It was a 2-year seat. I didn't know what I was getting myself in for, but John's enthusiasm and his love of all things to do with helping people really was contagious, and I came to love the work a lot. As my tenure comes to a close, the first week of January, I want people to know that I have not taken the responsibility or the privilege of this role for granted. And together we have accomplished a lot over the last decade. Let me back up here. I think, there we are. So this was the city council back then. You might recognize some of those folks. We have from left to right Peg Hamlet, Linda Paul, then Mayor Marshall Comstock, John Dickinson, John Kimberling, and myself. The council member who is not pictured is Joanne Mack.
I see her arm.
You can see her.
Her hand.
Is Joanne's hand someplace?
And her feet down below.
Really?
Between
Okay.
Peg and Linda.
All right, hiding in there, okay. So we became Moscow, the United States' first new city. This was a concept Linda Paul brought back from a National League of Cities conference. And the concept was that we have two universities so close together, why don't we capitalize on that? That idea has morphed into the economic engine now called the Palouse Knowledge Corridor. The same person, Sylvia Lovely, who was a consultant on this, coming from the Kentucky League of Cities, was presenting a seminar at the National League of Cities conference I just attended in Seattle last month, and the topic was the local foods movement across the country. And she said that several of the cities, such as Denver, were quite far advanced in the local food movement. They knew quite a lot about it, and the model she used for excellence and for them to aspire to emulate was Moscow, Idaho. On each of my campaigns, I've consistently run on a platform of open, accessible, responsive government. And so probably the thing that I am most proudest of was the 2004 City Council's decision to change the meeting schedules. City councils back then used to meet in the afternoon. They might grab a bite of dinner and they would come back to the council meeting that evening. So meeting at the committee level first, have a bite to eat, reconvene as a full council, and vote on those things. And we put at least a week's worth of break in the middle of that so the public could have time to become informed, ask questions, and so the policymakers could mull things over. Other things that city council accomplished: we created the Human Rights Commission by an ordinance. We established the Water Conservation Ordinance. We passed the Public Art Ordinance, setting aside 1% of the city's portion of the capital projects for public art. And the Hamilton Indoor Recreation Center opened that year. In 2005, we passed the Outdoor Lighting Ordinance and the Large Retail Establishment Emergency Ordinance. So 2005, here's a quote from Yogi Berra. It says, here's his advice: if you come to a fork in the road, take it. And that's exactly what the voters did in 2005. They elected a majority of progressive candidates for Moscow City Council, and you might have thought we'd turned the city on its ear, but we just accomplished a lot of really good things. So in 2006, we created and elevated the status of the Tree Commission, which had been kind of buried in the community forestry ordinance before that. And that's what we heard from Sarah Church's students today about the urban forest and the tree planting that might go on here. We formalized the Large Retail Establishment Ordinance. We dissolved the Bicycle Advisory Committee and incorporated that as an equally valid partner on the Transportation Commission, with the idea that bicycles are reasonable, equal players in the multimodal system. We initiated the work to identify sites for surface water collection and water conservation measures, including increasing use of treated effluent. We initiated the city's revision of the comprehensive plan. As Bill Belknap knows so well, we started the Green Building Medallion program there. It's presently just for residential purposes. Kelly Moore, who's seated in the front row tonight, built the first green house in Moscow and got that medallion on the wall. So that's a wonderful program. It's an alternative to the more expensive LEED certification, but comparable standards. And I think it's a model for other places. I have taken that to state and national conferences to share with other communities. Hopefully it'll expand to commercial opportunities in the near future. The City Council at that time began to emphasize the need for expanding the housing stock to include retirement housing and townhouses and row houses. And so some things never change. We're still on that same topic now. As first-time mayor, I started the open mic segment, as we heard tonight, with at the beginning of council meetings, so the public could share things that we maybe hadn't thought to put on those agendas. We started analyzing the downtown parking situation and took an inventory and took a critical view of the policies pertaining to parking in the Central Business District. We articulated support for a bicycle pedestrian bridge at 3rd and Mountain View. I established the grants manager position, and I think we've all agreed that Elisa Stone has done a fabulous job for the city. Last I heard, we were bringing in between $1 and $1.5 million per year, in large part due to her good work and the collaboration she has with all city departments. We started the sustainability internship. We heard from Keegan Caldwell tonight in his presentation about greenhouse gas emissions reduction, but he's one of a series of interns, and it's a great model for us to work with University of Idaho students to do things like the sustainability assessment that we started back in 2006. I started a protocol to formalize the thanks that we express to our volunteer commissioners. As I said at the opening of tonight's meeting, it's hugely important to the well-being of our city that we have such talented and generous people dedicating their time as volunteers. We sought a designation for a downtown historic district, which subsequently came to pass. National League of Cities named Moscow as the nation's first, or as the only inclusive community in Idaho because of our diversity, our outreach, our embracing our differences and celebrating those. I started the Earth Day Awards, and that's been an annual event that's been pretty well received, I think, a chance to recognize good work for sustainable practices, and then issued the Mayor's Arts Awards that year. The 2006 City Council looked like that. Look how young everybody was. John Weber, is he still back there? Oh. Anyway.
He left.
So the 2006 City Council supported extending the health insurance benefits that were offered by our insurance provider to domestic partners of employees, including same-sex partners and their dependents. This 2006 City Council also supported the state's first so-called living wage for city employees and contractors whose services exceeded $25,000 per year, which mostly affected our janitorial services. That particular resolution was rescinded in 2010. There's John Dickinson. Looks a little different than a lot of us might have remembered him, but as I mentioned earlier, he and I met in 2003 as rookie candidates for City Council. I think most people who met him recognized him as an optimist who loved helping people. So on January 3rd, 2007, the day after he was elected City Council President and 4 days before he would die, stopping to help at a car accident on Interstate 84. but it was going to be 7 months before they recovered his body from the river. But John told me on that day, January 2007, that the accomplishment that gave him the most satisfaction in his tenure on the City Council was securing the 4-way stop signs near the schools and the youth recreation facilities at D and Mountain View. That was the one thing. Of all the phenomenal things he did, and some of you know he became involved in local politics because his graduate student, Sammy Hussein, was accused of terrorist activities. And John came to his aid and stuck by him throughout until Sammy was released and allowed to go home. But the void that John left was profound, and it changed the trajectory of our city and our lives in many ways. We had another tragedy in 2007. Our Officer Lee Newbill was killed in the line of duty. The gunman, a sniper, also took the lives of his own wife, Crystal Hamilton, who worked at our courthouse, and the church sexton, Paul Bauer, from the Moscow Presbyterian Church. In addition to his own life, he wounded several other people, and our community pulled together in grief and with resolve. Also in 2007, a University of Idaho student, David Boss, was shot to death execution style. And then Chief of Police Dan Weaver, then President of the University Tim White, and I held a joint press conference to speak frankly about violence in our community and our society. In 2007, with the protracted 7-month-long status that John Dickinson had as simply missing prior to recovery of his body, and we had a legal prohibition of appointing a replacement for him, although that state law has since been changed. We had the sniper shooting rampage that I mentioned. That was in May, in the context of the Virginia Tech shootings in April, that execution-style shooting also in April. We had recurrent hospitalizations of our council member, Linda Paul, who thankfully is doing much better these days. If you've seen her out and about, she's still mixing it up. We had the resignation of council member Bob Stout, who resigned to join the Hillary Clinton campaign in Iowa. And all of those stressors, I think, put strains on our city council, the remaining colleagues who were there, and on the public, who that November had another big political shift manifest at the polls. So I would mention on the matter of firearms, it is still illegal in Idaho to have guns in schools or in courtrooms, that colleges and universities have the authority to prohibit them on campus, but under the exclusive authority of the Idaho legislature, it is legal to bring guns into city council chambers and youth recreation facilities like our aquatic center, both of which we have seen demonstrated. This is the 2008 City Council. You probably recognize most of those faces. Left to right, we have Walter Steed, Wayne Krause, Bill Lambert, myself as mayor, John Weber, Tom Lamar, and Dan Carscallon. The first ordinance of this council passed, which was, it turned out to be really successful, but at the time it was very controversial. Anybody remember? It was the noise ordinance. Yeah. And also, that was the year that the Water Department started the Yscape Recognition Program for water conserving landscapes, which I think has been very successful. And that name, by the way, was coined by Nicole Baker, our very own water conservation specialist. So go see Nicole at the Water Department and get some free conservation devices over there. The 2008 City Council began its journey in the midst of the comprehensive plan revision, and that included an impressive amount and a very intense amount of citizen involvement, which seemed to surprise and impress the consultants who seemed beside themselves. Bill Belknap took it in stride. It was his invaluable work and that of his team in the Community Development Department that allowed us to make this visionary document Moscow's own. So the comprehensive plan doesn't have legal teeth per se, but it definitely is the community's collective vision, and it's a wonderful document, thanks in large part to Bill and his staff. So good job, Bill.